Vanessa Caldwell leaned close enough for only me to hear her perfume and her words. "You embarrassed this family? Again." Her smile never moved for the guests watching us, but her voice cut sharper than anything I'd heard in years. I stood there holding a glass I no longer remembered picking up, feeling smaller in a room I had once helped build for my son. I could have argued. I could have cried. But instead, something inside me settled into a quiet kind of certainty. If Vanessa wanted a perfect evening, controlled, polished, unforgettable, then I would give it to her. I would just make sure one guest was there she never expected. If this moment made your chest tighten even a little, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel like an embarrassment in your own family? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every comment. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these moments together. My name is Mildred Barrett, and for most of my life, I believed that if you loved your family enough, truly enough, everything else would find its place. Respect would follow love. Loyalty would follow sacrifice. And kindness, well, kindness would always come back around. At least that's what I used to believe. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in the same quiet neighborhood just outside Charlotte, North Carolina for over 40 years. The maple tree in my front yard was planted the year my son Daniel turned 5. I remember how small his hands were when he helped me pat the dirt down, how he insisted the tree would grow faster if he talked to it every morning before school. For a long time, I thought that tree and my boy would grow strong side by side, rooted in the same values. My husband, Harold Barrett, would have liked that thought. Harold was the kind of man who didn't say much, but when he did, you listened. He worked as a mechanic for nearly 30 years, his hands always stained with grease no matter how hard he scrubbed. But those same hands built. Our life, fixed. Our roof mended. Daniel's broken toys held mine steady the night we found out about his heart condition. Harold passed away when Daniel was just 16. That's when everything changed. I went from being a wife and mother to being the only pillar left standing. There was no time to fall apart. Bills didn't wait for grief. Tuition didn't care about tears. So I worked 2 jobs at first, then 3 when Daniel got into college. I cleaned offices at night, worked the register at a grocery store in the mornings, and took on sewing repairs for neighbors in between. I learned how to stretch every dollar until it begged for mercy. And through it all, Daniel stayed my reason. He was a good boy. A kind one. The kind who noticed when I was too tired to cook and would quietly make scrambled eggs without being asked. The kind who never complained about hand-me-down clothes or second-hand textbooks. When he got accepted into college, we both cried at the kitchen table like we had just won something much bigger than a degree. In a way, we had. Daniel built a life I was proud of. He moved into a respectable career in finance, something I didn't fully understand but admired anyway. He bought a house far nicer than anything I had ever lived in and insisted I come visit often. For a while, it felt like everything we had struggled for had finally settled into something good and steady. And then he met Vanessa Caldwell. The first time I saw her, I remember thinking how polished she was. Not just pretty, though she certainly was, but composed in a way that made everything around her seem slightly out of place. She wore confidence like it was tailored specifically for her, and she spoke with a kind of effortless charm that drew people in immediately. "Mrs. Barrett, I've heard so much about you," she said, extending her hand with a smile that could have belonged in a magazine. I liked her. At first, she brought Daniel gifts that were too expensive for someone who had just started dating him. She recommended restaurants I couldn't pronounce and wines I didn't know how to order. She laughed easily, but not always kindly. Sometimes there was a sharpness underneath something I couldn't quite name at the time. Still, I told myself I was being overly sensitive. After all, times had changed. The world Daniel lived in was not the one I had raised him in. Maybe Vanessa was simply modern. The small things started quietly. The first time she corrected me, it was over something trivial. I had used a word slightly wrong in conversation, and she gently interjected, smiling as she said, "Oh, I think you mean something else, Mildred." It was said sweetly enough, but I noticed Daniel glance at me differently after that, just for a second. Then came the comments about my clothes. "You're so comfortable," she once said, tilting her head as she looked at my cardigan. I wish I could be that carefree. Carefree! That was one way to describe clothes bought on sale racks and worn for years. Family dinners began to change too. Traditions I had kept for decades, Sunday roasts, simple holiday meals were gradually replaced with reservations at upscale restaurants or catered events where everything looked beautiful but felt distant. Conversations shifted from stories and laughter to networking opportunities and appearances. Vanessa had a way of guiding those changes without ever appearing forceful. She would suggest something casually, and somehow it would become the new standard. Daniel followed along not because he was weak, but because he trusted her. He believed in her version of what their life should look like. And slowly, without either of us saying it out loud, I began to feel like a guest in my own family. There were moments small, almost forgettable on their own, that started to collect into something heavier. Like the time I brought homemade pie to one of their dinner parties, only to see it quietly moved off the table in favor of a professionally plated dessert. Or the way Vanessa would introduce me to her friends. "This is Daniel's mother, Mildred. She's very traditional." The word traditional always carried a weight I couldn't quite shake, as though it meant outdated rather than meaningful. Even Daniel began to change in ways I didn't fully recognize. He became busier, more distracted. Our phone calls grew shorter. When we did speak, there was often a subtle impatience in his tone, like he was trying to bridge two worlds that didn't quite fit together anymore. And I tried. I really did. I adjusted my words, chose my outfits more carefully, listened more than I spoke. I told myself that this was just what families did. They evolved, they adapted. Love meant making space for new people, new ways of living. But no matter how much I adjusted, it never quite felt like enough. Because the truth was, I wasn't being asked to grow. I was being asked to shrink. And somewhere deep inside the woman who had worked 3 jobs, who had buried her husband and still found a way to raise a good man, began to feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not anger, not yet, but something close. Something that waited quietly, watching, remembering, and learning. The night Vanessa called me an embarrassment wasn't loud. There were no raised voices, no broken glasses, no scene that anyone else at the table could point to and say, that was the moment everything changed. But for me, it was exactly that. The dinner was held at a private room in an upscale restaurant in downtown Charlotte, one of those places where the lighting is dim on purpose and the menus don't show prices. It was for Vanessa's younger sister, Olivia Caldwell, who had just gotten engaged to a man Vanessa described as a perfect match. From what I gathered, that meant he came from the right kind of family, had the right kind of job, and knew the right kind of people. The table was long set with polished silverware that reflected the soft glow of candles. Everyone was dressed in a way that looked effortless but clearly wasn't. Vanessa moved through the room like she belonged to it, greeting people, touching shoulders lightly, laughing at just the right moments. Daniel sat beside me, his hand occasionally brushing mine as if to reassure me I was still part of things. I held on to that more than I probably should have. At first, everything went smoothly. Conversations drifted from wedding plans to business opportunities, from travel to investments. It wasn't my world, but I listened carefully, nodding when it felt appropriate, smiling when others did. Then Olivia asked how Daniel and I had managed after Harold passed. It was a simple question, a kind one even. And before I could second-guess myself, I answered honestly. We didn't have much, I said, my voice steady but soft. But we had each other, and that made us richer than most people realize. There was a brief pause, not uncomfortable, just noticeable. I smiled, thinking maybe I should lighten the moment. I used to tell Daniel that love doesn't come with a price tag. You build it day by day, even when things are hard. A few people nodded politely. One woman across the table gave a small, approving smile. But when I glanced at Vanessa, I saw something else entirely. Her expression hadn't changed much. She was still smiling, but her eyes had gone still. Not cold exactly, but focused in a way that made my chest tighten. She lifted her glass smoothly, redirecting the conversation. To new beginnings, she said, her tone warm and controlled. And to building a future that reflects everything we deserve. Glasses clinked. The moment passed. Or so I thought. Dinner continued, and I said very little after that. I could feel something had shifted, though I didn't yet understand the shape of it. Daniel leaned toward me once and whispered, "Everything okay?" I nodded, not wanting to make something out of nothing. But Vanessa was quieter than usual, more precise. Every word she spoke seemed measured, as if she were carefully steering the evening back onto a path she preferred. By the time dessert arrived, I was already thinking about going home. I was tired not just physically, but in that deeper way that comes from trying too hard to belong in a place that keeps reminding you that you don't. When the dinner finally ended, guests began to stand, gathering coats, exchanging final pleasantries. Daniel stepped away to speak with Olivia's fiancé, leaving me near the entrance of the private room. That's when Vanessa approached me. "Could I have a word?" she asked, her smile still in place. I followed her into the hallway without hesitation. It felt like the polite thing to do. The hallway was quieter, the soft hum of the restaurant replacing the chatter from inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa turned to face me. Her smile disappeared. "You embarrassed this family tonight," she said, her voice low and sharp. The words landed harder than I expected. I began confused. "I didn't mean—" "That's the problem," she interrupted. "You don't mean to. You just do." I stared at her, trying to understand how a simple comment about love had turned into this. "I was just answering Olivia's question," I said carefully. Vanessa let out a small, humorless laugh. "No, Mildred," she said, shaking her head slightly. "You were reminding everyone in that room where Daniel came from." There it was. Not said outright, but clear enough. "You talk about struggle and sacrifice like they're virtues people admire," she continued. "But in certain circles, they're not. They're uncomfortable." My chest tightened. "Those people don't understand us," I said quietly. Vanessa's eyes flickered. "That's exactly my point," she replied. "We're not trying to be understood by them. We're trying to belong." "We?" It sounded so simple the way she said it, like she was including me. But I knew better. "And to belong," she went on, "we need to present ourselves a certain way, carefully, thoughtfully, not nostalgically." I felt heat rise in my face, but I kept my voice steady. "Are you saying I shouldn't talk about my life? I'm saying," Vanessa said, stepping slightly closer, "that you should know when not to." The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the faint clinking of dishes from the dining room, the distant murmur of voices that no longer felt like they belonged to me. "I didn't realize I needed permission to speak," I said finally. Vanessa's expression softened, but not in a comforting way. "In a room like that," she said gently, "yes, you do." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how easily she said them, how certain she was that she was right. "I include you because you're Daniel's mother," she continued. "But inclusion comes with expectations, and tonight you didn't meet them." The hallway felt colder somehow. I didn't know there were expectations. I said, my voice quieter now. Vanessa sighed as if I were a difficult child. "That's what I'm trying to teach you," she said, "but you have to be willing to learn." Something inside me shifted then, not loudly, not dramatically. Just firmly. "I've spent most of my life learning," I said, "just not the same lessons you have." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's obvious," she replied. Before I could respond, Daniel's voice called out from behind us. "Hey, everything okay?" Vanessa turned instantly, her smile returning as if it had never left. "Of course," she said lightly. "I was just thanking your mom for coming tonight." Daniel looked between us, his expression uncertain. "You sure?" he asked. "Absolutely," Vanessa said, slipping her arm through his. "We were just talking about how different things are now compared to when you were growing up." Daniel glanced at me. I forced a small smile. "It was a lovely evening," I said. And just like that, the moment was gone. But something had changed. Not in the room, not in the way Vanessa carried herself or the way Daniel accepted her version of things. It had changed in me, because for the first time I understood something clearly. Vanessa wasn't trying to hurt me by accident. She was shaping the world around her carefully, deliberately, and I simply didn't fit into the version she was creating. And standing there in that quiet hallway, I realized something else. If I didn't fit into her version of the story, then maybe it was time I told my own. A week after that dinner, I received an invitation. It arrived in a thick cream envelope, the kind that feels expensive before you even open it. My name, Mildred Barrett, was written in careful, elegant script across the front. For a moment, I simply held it in my hands, turning it over slowly, as if I could somehow understand its purpose without breaking the seal. But I already had a feeling I knew. Inside was a formal invitation to what Vanessa was calling an evening of gratitude and new beginnings. It was to be held at Daniel and Vanessa's home, though calling it a home felt almost inaccurate these days. It was more like a showcase, tall ceilings, wide glass windows, rooms that echoed when you spoke too softly. The purpose of the event was described in polished language. A gathering of colleagues, friends, and select family to celebrate Daniel's recent promotion and Vanessa's expanding role in a philanthropic advisory circle. Select family. I read that line twice, then 3 times. It wasn't crossed out. It wasn't subtle. It was right there in ink, as if to remind me that even my presence had to be justified now. Still, I set the invitation down carefully on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea. Old habits, I suppose. When something unsettled me, I didn't react immediately. I let it sit. I let it speak. And this invitation, it was saying quite a lot. 2 days later, I stopped by Daniel's house unannounced. Not to confront anyone, not to question anything. Just to see for myself what kind of evening Vanessa was building. The front door was unlocked, which it often was during the day. I stepped inside and called out softly, "Daniel?" No answer. But I could hear voices coming from the dining room. I moved quietly down the hallway, not out of secrecy, but out of instinct. When you've lived long enough, you learn when it's better to observe before announcing yourself. Vanessa was inside with another woman, tall, well-dressed, her voice sharp in that effortless way that comes from confidence. I'm telling you, the guest list has to be controlled, Vanessa was saying, standing near the table where papers were spread out in neat rows. This isn't just a party. It's positioning. The other woman laughed lightly. You always say that. Because it's true, Vanessa replied. Every person in that room needs to reinforce the narrative. Narrative. I stayed just outside the doorway, my hand resting lightly against the wall. What about Daniel's side? The woman asked. Family, old friends. Vanessa let out a small sigh, the kind that carried more irritation than the conversation deserved. Managed, she said. Carefully. I felt something tighten in my chest. And Mildred, the woman, asked casually. There was a pause. Then Vanessa spoke, her tone quieter but unmistakably clear. She'll be there, she said. But she won't be central. The woman chuckled. That's one way to put it. Vanessa didn't laugh. Older relatives can be unpredictable, she continued. You just have to keep them occupied. Give them a role that feels meaningful but doesn't interfere. My fingers pressed slightly harder against the wall. Like what the woman asked. Vanessa glanced down at the papers, flipping one page over. I was thinking she could bring something homemade, she said. People find that charming. It reinforces the whole grounded upbringing angle without letting it dominate the room. Charming. I closed my eyes for a brief second, not because I was surprised, but because hearing it said out loud made it impossible to pretend anymore. I just don't want any unexpected moments, Vanessa added. Everything needs to feel seamless. And it will, the woman said confidently. You always pull these things off. Vanessa smiled. I could hear it in her voice. I have to, she said. There's too much riding on this. Too much riding on this. That line stayed with me. I stepped back quietly, careful not to make a sound. There was no reason to interrupt. No reason to reveal that I had heard anything at all. Instead, I walked back through the hallway, out the front door, and into the soft afternoon light as if I had never been there. I didn't cry. Not then. I've learned that tears don't come as easily when you've spent years holding things together. They wait. They gather. And when they do come, it's never at the moment people expect. But I did feel something else. Something clearer than hurt. Understanding. Vanessa didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a piece. A piece of a story. She was carefully arranging a story where she controlled every detail, every impression, every outcome. And in that story, I wasn't meant to speak. I was meant to represent something. Something safe. Something small. Something manageable. I went home and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The invitation lay in front of me again, its elegant lettering now feeling almost ironic. An evening of gratitude and new beginnings. I traced my finger lightly over the words. Gratitude. For what new beginnings? For whom? That's when I remembered something. Not clearly at first, just a flicker of a moment from months ago. Vanessa in the kitchen speaking on the phone, her voice lower than usual, more tense. I told you that's no longer relevant, she had said. There's no reason for you to be involved. I had entered the room just then, and she had ended the call abruptly, her expression shifting too quickly back into its usual calm. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now it felt different. I leaned back in my chair, letting the memory settle into place. There had been a name, too. Not said fully, not in a way that lingered, but enough for me to catch it in passing, Diane. Or maybe Diane Whitaker. I wasn't entirely sure, but I was sure of one thing. Vanessa had been afraid in that moment. Not irritated, not annoyed. Afraid. And people like Vanessa didn't fear easily. I sat there looking at the invitation, at the carefully curated words, at the image of a perfect evening she was trying so hard to create. No surprises, no disruptions, no one who didn't fit the story. Slowly, almost without realizing it, I reached for my phone. I didn't dial anything yet. I didn't search. I just held it. Because for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to avoid embarrassing anyone. I wasn't thinking about how to make myself smaller. I was thinking about something else entirely. If Vanessa was so determined to control who belonged in that room, then maybe the most honest thing I could do was invite someone who didn't. I didn't act right away. That's something people often misunderstand about women my age. They assume that when we make a decision, it comes from impulse, emotion, hurt, maybe even bitterness. But the truth is, we've had a lifetime of practice in waiting, in watching, in understanding what things mean beneath what's said out loud. So I waited. For 2 days, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. I watered my plants, folded laundry, stopped by the local grocery store, where the cashier still called me Miss Mildred like she had for years. I even called Daniel once just to ask how work was going. He sounded tired. "Just busy, Mom," he said. "This event. It's kind of a big deal." "I can tell," I replied gently. "Vanessa's putting a lot into it." There was a pause. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "She is." I waited, hoping he might say something more, something honest. But he didn't. And I didn't push. That too was something I had learned over the years. Sometimes people have to arrive at the truth on their own. After we hung up, I sat by the window for a while watching the afternoon settle into evening. The sky turned that soft shade of blue that always reminded me of quieter times before life became something you had to manage so carefully. That's when I decided it was time. I didn't have an address for Diane Whitaker. Not yet. But I had something better than most people realized. I had patience and I had memory. The name had stayed with me, echoing quietly in the back of my mind. I knew I had seen it somewhere before, not just heard it in passing. So I began where I always do when something feels unfinished. I looked through what I already had. It started with a box in my hallway closet. Not a hidden box, not something secret, just a place where I kept old papers, newsletters, and things I never quite found a reason to throw away. Over the years, it had become a kind of quiet archive of moments I didn't fully understand at the time. I sat down on the floor and opened it carefully. Most of it was ordinary receipts, greeting cards, community flyers. But then about halfway through, I found something that made me stop. It was a folded program from a charity luncheon Daniel and Vanessa had attended nearly a year ago. I remembered that day because Vanessa had been particularly proud of it. She had talked about the event for weeks beforehand, mentioning how important the attendees were, how much it could open doors. I hadn't gone. At the time, she said it was a limited seating situation, and I accepted that without question. Now, as I unfolded the program, my eyes moved slowly down the printed names. Sponsors, board members, guest speakers. And there it was, Diane Whitaker. Not at the bottom of the list, not in small print, but centered, bold, unmistakable. I felt something settle into place inside me. This wasn't just a name Vanessa had once known. This was someone important, someone connected to the very circles Vanessa was trying so hard to belong to. And more importantly, someone Vanessa had deliberately removed from her current narrative. I held the program in my hands for a long moment, letting the weight of that realization sink in. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and placed it on the table next to the invitation. 2 pieces of a puzzle, finally starting to align. The next step required something I hadn't done in quite a while. I asked for help. There's a woman at my church, Margaret Ellis, who has a way of knowing people. Not in a gossiping sense, but in a quiet, connected way. She had spent years working in nonprofit circles before retiring, and if anyone would recognize a name like Diane Whitaker, it would be her. I called her that evening. "Mildred, it's so good to hear from you," she said warmly. "Everything all right, I believe so," I replied. "I just had a question for you." I explained what I had found, keeping my voice calm, my words measured. I didn't speak poorly of Vanessa. I didn't accuse. I simply asked if she knew anything about Diane Whitaker. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Margaret exhaled softly. "Well," she said, "that's not a name I hear often these days." My grip tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She used to be very prominent," Margaret continued. "Philanthropy advisory boards, mentorship programs, strong reputation, very respected." "Used to be." "What changed?" I asked. Margaret hesitated. "There was an issue," she said carefully. "Not with her directly. With someone she had taken under her wing." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Ambitious young woman, Margaret went on, very polished, very driven, but there were concerns about how she advanced, taking credit for work that wasn't entirely hers, forming connections strategically. My heart beat a little faster. "And Diane?" I asked. "She handled it quietly," Margaret said. "Didn't make a public scene. But she stepped back from that partnership, distanced herself." Another pause. "Why are you asking about this, Mildred?" I looked down at the invitation again, at the words Vanessa had chosen so carefully, because I think I said slowly that someone is hoping she won't be remembered. Margaret didn't respond immediately, but when she did, her voice was softer. "Well," she said, "if Diane Whitaker is involved in something again, it would mean she still holds influence." Influence. That word mattered. "Would you happen to have a way to contact her?" I asked. There was another pause. Then quietly I might. I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of relief, but out of clarity. This was real now. Not suspicion. Not assumption. Truth. "I'd appreciate it," I said. "I'll see what I can do," Margaret replied. "But Mildred, be careful. These things, they don't always unfold the way we expect." "I understand," I said, and I did, because this wasn't about exposing someone for the sake of it. This wasn't about proving a point. It was about something much simpler, something Vanessa had tried very hard to take away from me. Respect. I hung up the phone and stood there in the quiet of my kitchen. The house felt the same as it always had, familiar, steady, grounded. But I felt different inside it. Not smaller, not uncertain, but aware. For years I had allowed myself to be shaped by someone else's version of what I should be. Softer, quieter, less visible. Now, for the first time in a long while, I was beginning to understand something clearly. I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. I didn't need to argue to be right. Sometimes, all it took was inviting the truth into the room. Margaret called me back the next afternoon. I had just finished drying the dishes when the phone rang, the soft chime echoing through the quiet of my kitchen. For a moment, I let it ring once more than necessary, not out of hesitation but to steady myself. "I knew this call mattered," Mildred Margaret said as soon as I answered. "I found something." I sat down slowly, my fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table. "Thank you," I said. "What did you learn?" "I was able to get an email address," she replied. "It's not widely shared, but Diane still consults privately." I didn't tell her anything specific, just that an old acquaintance might be reaching out. Old acquaintance. It felt like a generous description of what I was about to become. I appreciate that, I said quietly. Mildred Margaret added, her voice lowering. If this has anything to do with what I think it does, just remember, truth can help, but it can also unravel things. I looked down at the invitation still resting on my table. Some things need to unravel, I said gently. There was a pause on the other end, then a soft sigh. Well, Margaret said you've always known your own mind. After we hung up, I didn't write immediately. Instead, I made myself another cup of tea chamomile this time and carried it to the small desk by the window. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting soft patterns across the wood. It was the same desk where I had once helped Daniel with his homework, where I had written checks late at night balancing numbers that never quite wanted to balance. It felt right to sit there now. When I finally opened my laptop, my hands were steady. I kept the message simple. Dear Ms. Whitaker, my name is Mildred Barrett. I believe we have a mutual connection through my daughter-in-law, Vanessa Caldwell. I came across your name recently and felt it was important to reach out. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you if you are willing. There are some things I believe you should know, and perhaps some things I need to understand. Respectfully, Mildred Barrett. I read it twice. Then I sent it. And just like that, something shifted. Not outwardly, nothing in the room changed. Nothing in my life suddenly rearranged itself. But inside there was a quiet sense of movement, like a door I hadn't realized was closed had finally been opened. I didn't expect a quick reply. People like Diane Whitaker didn't spend their afternoons checking emails from strangers. So I waited. That evening passed quietly. I made a simple dinner, watched a little television, and went to bed earlier than usual. Sleep came easily, which surprised me. Perhaps because for once I wasn't carrying uncertainty, I was moving toward clarity. The reply came the next morning. I saw it before I even poured my coffee. The subject line simple and direct. Re-inquiry. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. I already knew this mattered. I opened the message. Mrs. Barrett, thank you for reaching out. I am familiar with Vanessa Caldwell. Your message suggests there may be more to discuss than a casual introduction. I would be willing to speak with you. Please let me know a convenient time. Diane Whitaker. No warmth, no hesitation. Just clarity. I appreciated that. We arranged a phone call for later that afternoon. The hours leading up to it felt longer than they should have. Not because I was nervous, but because I was aware that whatever I learned next would shape everything that followed. At exactly 3 o'clock, my phone rang. This is Diane Whitaker. The voice on the other end said, calm measured with a quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. Ms. Whitaker. This is Mildred Barrett, I replied. Thank you for speaking with me. Of course, she said. You mentioned Vanessa Caldwell. What would you like to know? There was no point in circling around it. I'd like to understand your history with her, I said. A brief pause. Then Diane exhaled softly. That's a question with a longer answer than most people expect, she said. I have time, I replied. And I did. For the next several minutes, Diane spoke not dramatically, not with bitterness, but with the kind of precision that comes from someone who has already processed what happened and no longer needs to prove anything. Vanessa, she explained, had entered her world about 6 years earlier. She was impressive, Diane said. Articulate, driven, very aware of how to present herself. That matched what I already knew. I took her on as a mentee, Diane continued. introduced her to people, brought her into projects, gave her opportunities she hadn't yet earned on her own. I could picture it. Vanessa stepping into a room, absorbing everything, learning quickly, and for a while Diane said she did well. For a while. What changed, I asked. There was a slight shift in Diane's tone, not emotional, but firmer. She began positioning herself in ways that blurred lines, she said. Taking ownership of work that was collaborative. Building relationships that excluded the people who had supported her. Rewriting narratives. Rewriting narratives. The phrase echoed in my mind. Was it intentional, I asked? Diane didn't hesitate. Yes. The certainty in her voice settled heavily. When I addressed it, she continued, she didn't deny it. She reframed it. Said she was doing what was necessary to move forward. That the world rewards those who know how to tell the right story. I closed my eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like Vanessa. What did you do? I asked. I ended the professional relationship, Diane said. Quietly, without public accusation. I believe in accountability, not spectacle. And Vanessa, I asked. She moved on, Diane replied. Rebuilt her image elsewhere. I heard she married well. There was no judgment in her voice, just observation. Yes, I said softly. She did. A silence settled between us, then not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Finally, Diane spoke again. Mrs. Barrett, she said, why are you asking me this now? I looked out the window, watching the leaves shift gently in the breeze. Because she's built a life with my son, I said, and I don't believe he knows any of this. Another pause. Longer this time. That complicates things, Diane said. It does, I agreed. And what do you intend to do with this information? She asked. It was a fair question, one I had already considered carefully. I'm not interested in humiliating anyone, I said, but I am interested in truth, especially when lies are being used to shape how people are treated. Diane didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice carried something new. Not warmth exactly, but respect. That's a difficult line to walk, she said. I've walked more difficult ones, I replied quietly. A soft exhale came through the line. I imagine you have. Another moment passed. Then Diane said something that changed everything. I should tell you, she said Vanessa has recently been attempting to reconnect with certain circles she was previously excluded from. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. What kind of circles? I asked. Advisory boards, philanthropic networks, influence-based groups, Diane replied. The kind where reputation matters more than anything else. My eyes moved slowly to the invitation on the table. An event is coming up, I said. At her home. I'm aware, Diane said. That made me pause. You are? I asked. Yes, she replied. It's been discussed. A quiet understanding settled over me. Vanessa wasn't just hosting a party, she was staging something. And she didn't invite you, I said. No, Diane said simply. Of course she hadn't. Because Diane wasn't just part of Vanessa's past. She was the part Vanessa couldn't control. The silence between us deepened again. Then carefully, I asked the question that had been forming since the beginning. If you had the opportunity, I said, would you attend, Diane? Didn't answer right away. And in that pause, everything hung in the balance. Diane did not answer me right away. And in that silence, I could feel the weight of everything that had come before it. Her history with Vanessa, the careful distance she had chosen, the reputation she had protected by stepping away quietly instead of creating a public spectacle. I didn't rush her. At my age, I've learned that the most important answers don't come when you push. They come when you give them room. Finally, she spoke. That would depend. Diane said, her voice calm but thoughtful, on why I was being invited. It was a fair question, one I had anticipated. I wouldn't ask you to come for confrontation, I said carefully. And I wouldn't ask you to come to make a scene. Another pause. Then why would you ask at all? She asked. I looked down at my hands resting quietly in my lap, because I believe there's a version of the truth being presented in that room, I said slowly, and I don't think it's complete. Diane didn't interrupt. She's built something around my son, I continued. A story about who they are, where they come from, what they represent. And in that story, certain things have been removed. Certain people. You included, Diane said softly. Yes, I replied. And perhaps you as well. There was a shift on the line then, not dramatic, but noticeable. And what do you believe would happen if I walked into that room? She asked. I let the question sit for a moment before answering. I think I said that it would introduce something that hasn't been allowed there in a long time. And what is that? She asked. Reality. The word lingered between us. Not harsh, not aggressive, just honest. Diane exhaled quietly. You understand. She said that my presence would not go unnoticed. I do, I replied, and that it could create consequences not just for Vanessa, but for your son as well. That too I had considered. I'm aware, I said, but I also believe that living inside something untrue has consequences of its own. Silence again. Longer this time. I could almost hear her thinking, weighing, measuring, not emotionally, but carefully, the way someone does when they've spent years making decisions that affect more than just themselves. Finally, she spoke. Why now? She asked. The question caught me slightly off guard, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I hadn't yet put it into words. I thought about the hallway outside the restaurant, about Vanessa's voice. You embarrassed this family. I thought about the years before, that small comment, subtle corrections, the slow shrinking of my presence in my own son's life. And I realized something. Because I stayed quiet for too long, I said. The honesty of it surprised even me. I told myself it was kindness. I continued. Patience. Understanding. But at some point, silence stops being those things and becomes what Diane asked. Permission, I said. The words settled between us. I don't want to punish Vanessa, I added, but I won't keep participating in something that erases who I am or what my son comes from. Another pause. Then quietly Diane said, You're not what I expected. I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. I get that sometimes, I replied. There was a subtle shift in her tone, then something softer, though still composed. If I were to attend, she said, I would not do so under false pretenses. I wouldn't expect you to, I said. I would be respectful, she continued, but I would not pretend a history that doesn't exist. That's all I'm asking, I replied. And if Vanessa confronts me, she asked. She will, I said simply. Diane let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like amusement. I imagine she will. Another moment passed. Then she said, When is the event? Saturday evening? I replied. And you're inviting me personally? She asked. Yes. Not on behalf of Vanessa, not on behalf of Daniel, but as myself. There was a final pause. Then I'll attend. The words landed with a quiet certainty that felt far more powerful than anything dramatic. Thank you, I said. I'm not doing this for you. Diane added, not unkindly. I understand, I replied. I'm doing this because if she's attempting to re-enter certain circles under false pretenses. Diane continued, then that matters. I know I said, and she added after a brief pause, because I'm curious. That made me smile. I think that's fair, I said. We ended the call shortly after that. No dramatic goodbyes, no unnecessary words, just an understanding. When I set the phone down, I didn't move for a while. I sat there letting the moment settle into something real. It was done. The invitation had been extended and accepted. For a long time, I had been reacting to Vanessa's world, adjusting to it, accommodating it, trying to find a place within it. Now, for the first time, I had introduced something into that world that she hadn't chosen, something she hadn't approved, something she couldn't manage. Truth. The days leading up to the event passed in a strange kind of quiet. Vanessa called me twice. The first time, her tone was unusually warm. Mildred, I just wanted to make sure you received the invitation, she said. I did, I replied. Wonderful, she said. We're really looking forward to having you there. There was something almost rehearsed about the way she said it. I'm sure it will be a lovely evening, I said. I've put a lot of thought into it, she added. Every detail matters. I can tell, I replied. There was a brief pause, then she said, and I was thinking it might be nice if you brought one of your pies. People always respond so well to something homemade. Of course. Charming. Predictable. I'll consider it, I said. She hesitated just for a second. Then lightly, you always know how to add a personal touch. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I said, I'll see you Saturday. The second call came the day before the event. This time, her tone was softer, almost careful. Everything's still okay for tomorrow, she asked. Yes, I said. Good, she replied. It's important that everything goes smoothly. There it was again. Smoothly, controlled, seamless. I'm sure it will, I said. After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking around at the life I had built piece by piece. The worn armchair in the corner, the photographs on the wall, the quiet, steady presence of a home that had never needed to impress anyone to matter. For a moment, I wondered what Harold would say if he were here. Probably something simple. Something like, you don't have to prove your worth to people who already decided not to see it. I stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen. I didn't start baking a pie. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window watching the sky darken as evening settled in. Tomorrow, Vanessa would host her perfect event. Her carefully curated evening, her seamless presentation of a life she had worked very hard to construct. And tomorrow, for the first time, there would be something in that room she hadn't planned for. Not chaos, not revenge, just truth. And sometimes I've learned that's more than enough. Saturday arrived with a kind of quiet clarity. There were no storms, no dramatic signs from the sky, just a clean, steady morning that felt almost too calm for what I knew the evening would bring. I woke earlier than usual, not out of nerves but habit. Old routines don't disappear just because life becomes complicated. I made my coffee the same way I always did, stood by the kitchen window the same way I always had, and watched the light stretch slowly across the yard. For a moment, everything felt normal. And then I remembered. Tonight. Vanessa's event. Diane's arrival. The truth stepping into a room that had been carefully arranged to keep it out. I didn't rush through the day. There was no need. If anything, I moved more deliberately than usual, choosing my clothes with care, not for Vanessa, not for her guests, but for myself. I selected a navy blue dress I had worn only a few times over the years. It wasn't expensive, but it fit well, and it carried something more important than price. It carried memory. Harold had once told me I looked strong in that color. Not pretty, not elegant, strong. I held on to that. By late afternoon, I was ready. No pie in hand, no offering meant to soften my presence. Just myself. The drive to Daniel's house was quiet. The streets grew wider, the homes larger, the air somehow feeling more distant from the life I had known for decades. I had made this drive many times before, but tonight it felt different. Not because of where I was going, but because of why. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was already glowing with light. Cars lined the street, their polished surfaces reflecting the warm golden tones spilling from the windows. Through the glass, I could see movement guests mingling glasses, raised laughter floating outward in soft echoes. Perfect. Exactly as Vanessa had planned. I stepped out of the car and paused for a moment, looking at the house. This was my son's home, but tonight it felt like a stage, and I was no longer just an extra. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. It opened almost immediately. Vanessa stood there radiant. Her dress was elegant, perfectly fitted, her hair styled in that effortless way that likely took hours. Her smile was warm, welcoming, practiced. "Mildred," she said, her voice light with charm. "You look lovely." "Thank you," I replied calmly. Her eyes flicked briefly to my hands. Empty, a small pause barely noticeable to anyone else, but I saw it. Then the smile returned. "Come in," she said. I stepped inside. The house was exactly what I expected, every detail arranged with intention. Soft music played in the background, the lighting carefully balanced between warm and flattering. Tables were set with precision food displayed like artwork rather than something meant to be eaten. Guests filled the space, their conversations weaving together into a polished hum of social ease. Vanessa moved beside me as we entered, her hand lightly guiding my elbow. "Let me introduce you to a few people," she said. "Of course." "Control the narrative." She led me toward a small group near the living room. "This is my mother-in-law, Mildred Barrett," she said with a bright smile. "She's very traditional." There it was again. That word, wrapped in politeness, weighted with meaning. The guests smiled politely, nodding as if they understood something about me that I hadn't said. "Pleasure to meet you," one man said. "And you," I replied. I kept my voice steady, my posture relaxed. I didn't shrink. Vanessa stayed close for a few more minutes, guiding the conversation just enough to keep it within her comfort zone. Then, as another guest approached her, she excused herself. "I'll be right back," she said, but she didn't come back. Not to me. I moved slowly through the room after that, greeting people when appropriate, observing more than speaking. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was revealing. I could see the patterns now. The way Vanessa circulated, always aware of who she was speaking to, always adjusting her tone, her posture, her expressions depending on the person in front of her. The way Daniel followed her lead, not blindly, but habitually. The way conversations centered around influence, opportunity, perception. Everything had a purpose. Everything reinforced the same narrative. And yet, beneath it all, I could feel something else. Tension. Subtle but present. Vanessa's eyes moved more than usual, scanning the room in brief, almost imperceptible glances. Her smile, while flawless, didn't quite reach her eyes every time. She was watching, waiting, for something or someone. Daniel found me about an hour into the evening. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than the room around us. "You okay?" I turned toward him. I said. He studied my face for a moment as if trying to read something deeper. "You look different," he said. I smiled slightly. "Do I?" He nodded. "I don't know," he said. "Just calmer, I guess." "I feel calm," I replied. He seemed about to say something more, but Vanessa's voice called his name from across the room. He hesitated, then turned back to me. "I'll check on you later," he said. "I'll be right here," I replied. And I meant it. I didn't move much after that. I didn't need to, because I wasn't there to blend in. I was there to witness. Time passed slowly but not uncomfortably. Conversations rose and fell. Glasses were refilled. Laughter drifted through the air like something rehearsed. And then it happened. The front door opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. But something in the room shifted instantly. Not everyone noticed, but Vanessa did. I saw it in the way her body stilled, in the way her smile faltered just for a fraction of a second, in the way her eyes locked onto the entrance with a kind of focus she hadn't shown all evening. I turned slowly, and there she was, Diane Whitaker. She stood in the doorway with quiet composure, her presence neither forced nor hesitant. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, nothing flashy, nothing designed to draw attention. And yet, attention found her anyway, because she didn't need to demand it. She carried it. The room didn't fall silent, not completely, but something changed. Conversation softened, movement slowed. People noticed some immediately, others gradually, as recognition spread. Vanessa moved first. Of course she did. She crossed the room quickly, her expression already reshaping itself into something controlled, something welcoming. "Diane," she said, her voice light but tight around the edges. "What a surprise." Diane met her halfway. "Yes," she said calmly. "I imagine it is." Their eyes held for a moment. Not a confrontation. Not yet. But something far more powerful. Recognition. History. Truth. Vanessa's smile widened slightly, just enough to maintain appearances. "We weren't expecting you," she said. "I understand," Diane replied. Her tone wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. Vanessa glanced briefly around the room, aware now of the attention beginning to gather. "Well," she said, recovering smoothly, "we're always happy to welcome guests." Diane's gaze didn't waver. "That's good to hear," she said. "Because I was invited?" The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Vanessa's expression flickered just for a second. Then she smiled again. "Of course," she said. "How lovely." But I could see it now, clear as anything, for the first time that night. Vanessa wasn't in control, and she knew it. I stood where I was watching quietly. I didn't need to step forward. I didn't need to speak, because the truth had already entered the room, and it didn't need help finding its place. The moment Diane Whitaker said I was invited, something invisible shifted in the room. It wasn't loud. No one gasped. No glass shattered against the floor. But the air changed. You could feel it in the way conversations slowed, in the way people began to look just a little more carefully, listen just a little more closely. It was the kind of shift that only happens when something unexpected enters a space designed to avoid exactly that. Vanessa smiled. Of course she did. It was the same smile she had worn all evening, controlled, polished, flawless. But now I could see the strain behind it. The edges were tighter. The timing was just slightly off. Well, she said lightly, we're glad you could make it. Diane inclined her head. Thank you, she replied. It's been a while. There was a quiet emphasis on those last words. Vanessa let out a soft laugh, the kind meant to signal ease. Yes, it has, she said. We should catch up properly at some point. Diane didn't respond to that. Instead, she glanced briefly around the room, taking in the setting, the guests, the carefully arranged atmosphere. You've created quite an evening, she said. Vanessa's posture straightened slightly. We've put a lot of thought into it, she replied. I can see that, Diane said. Again, nothing in her tone was overtly critical, but it didn't need to be, because everyone within earshot could sense that this wasn't a simple exchange of pleasantries. This was something else. Vanessa shifted her weight subtly, her eyes flicking for just a moment toward Daniel, who had begun making his way across the room. Let me introduce you, Vanessa, said quickly, reaching for control. This is my husband, Daniel. Daniel stepped forward, his expression polite but clearly confused. Hi, he said. I don't think we've met. Diane turned to him, her gaze steady but not unkind. No, she said. I don't believe we have. But I'm familiar with your work. Daniel nodded, still trying to place her. And you are? He prompted. Diane Whitaker, she said. The name landed. I saw it in the way Daniel's brow furrowed slightly, in the way his eyes flicked briefly toward Vanessa. Recognition. Not full understanding yet. But something. Vanessa stepped in quickly. Diane and I worked together years ago, she said smoothly. In a completely different context. Different context. Carefully chosen words. Diane's gaze shifted back to Vanessa. Yes, she said. A very formative one. Daniel looked between them. Well, he said, trying to keep the tone light, it's nice to finally meet you. And you, Diane replied. There was a pause, then a small one but noticeable. Vanessa filled it immediately. Can I get you a drink? She asked, already turning slightly as if to move the conversation along. No, thank you, Diane said. I won't stay long. That caught Vanessa off guard. Oh, she said. Of course. Still, you're welcome to enjoy the evening. Diane nodded. I intend to. Vanessa hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then smiled again and stepped away, her attention already shifting to other guests. But I could see it now, the tension beneath the surface, the way her movements had become just slightly more urgent, the way her eyes returned to Diane more often than they should have. She was recalculating, adjusting, trying to contain something she hadn't planned for. Daniel lingered for a moment, still standing with Diane. So how do you know Vanessa? He asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Diane met his gaze directly. We worked closely for a time, she said. In what field? Daniel asked. Nonprofit advisory work, she replied. Strategic development. Mentorship. Daniel nodded slowly. That's interesting, he said. Vanessa's mentioned some of that, but not in detail. I'm not surprised, Diane said. There was no accusation in her voice, just a statement. Daniel shifted slightly, clearly unsure how to respond. Well, he said after a moment, it's good to have you here. Thank you, Diane replied. Then gently she added, it's important sometimes to reconnect with parts of our past. Daniel gave a small, uncertain smile. Yeah, he said. I guess it is. Across the room, Vanessa was watching. Not openly, but carefully. Always aware, I stood where I was observing. I hadn't moved since Diane arrived. I didn't need to, because everything I had hoped for, everything I had quietly set into motion was already unfolding. Not as chaos, not as confrontation, but as something far more unsettling for someone like Vanessa. Uncertainty. Diane moved through the room slowly, not inserting herself, not demanding attention. But wherever she went, there was a subtle shift. People recognized her, some immediately, others after a moment of consideration. I overheard fragments of conversation. Is that? I think it is. I haven't seen her in years. Names carried weight in rooms like this. Reputation mattered. History mattered. And Diane Whitaker had both. Vanessa, meanwhile, worked harder than she had all evening. Her laughter was just a touch louder, her gestures a bit more pronounced. She introduced guests with extra enthusiasm, as if reinforcing the structure she had built. But the structure had changed. Because now there was a presence in the room that didn't fit neatly into her design. One she couldn't redefine. One she couldn't quietly move aside. Eventually, she approached Diane again. I could see the decision in her posture, the choice to confront but carefully. "Diane," she said, her tone still pleasant but more focused now. "I'd love to have a quick word." Diane turned toward her. "Of course," she said. They stepped slightly away from the main group, not hidden, but more private. I didn't follow. I didn't need to hear every word, because some conversations reveal themselves through more than just sound. Vanessa spoke first, her expression composed, but her eyes sharp. "I'm curious," she said. "Who invited you?" Diane didn't hesitate. "Mildred Barrett," she replied. The name landed like a quiet echo. Vanessa's face didn't change immediately, but I saw it. That flicker. That moment where the mask slipped just enough to reveal what was underneath. Surprise. Calculation. And something else. Concern. "I see," Vanessa said slowly. Diane's gaze remained steady. "Do you?" she asked. Vanessa recovered quickly. "Well," she said, "it's a bit unconventional, but I suppose we can make it work." Make it work. Always control the narrative. Diane tilted her head slightly. "I'm not here to be worked in, Vanessa," she said calmly. The use of her first name without warmth, without deference, shifted something again. Vanessa's smile tightened. "Then why are you here?" she asked. Diane held her gaze. "Because you're presenting a version of your story," she said. "And I believe in complete ones." The words were quiet, measured, but they carried through the space between them with unmistakable clarity. Vanessa's composure wavered just for a second. Then she straightened. "I don't know what you think you're implying," she said, her voice still controlled, "but this isn't the place for honesty," Diane asked gently. Vanessa's jaw tightened. "For misunderstandings," she corrected. Diane gave a small, almost thoughtful nod. "Yes," she said. "That's often how they're described." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was different now. Heavier. More visible. Around them the room continued, but not quite as it had before. Because people were watching now, not openly, but attentively. Vanessa glanced around, aware of it. Always aware. Then she leaned in slightly, her voice lower. "This is not appropriate," she said. Diane's expression didn't change. "Neither is rewriting history," she replied. That was it. The line that shifted everything from subtle tension to something that could no longer be contained. Vanessa stepped back, her smile returning, but it didn't reach her eyes anymore. "We'll talk about this later," she said. Diane inclined her head. I look forward to it. Vanessa turned and walked away, but this time, she didn't look in control. She looked like someone trying very hard to regain it, and across the room Daniel was watching. Not confused anymore, but beginning to see. The room didn't explode after that exchange. There was no sudden confrontation, no raised voices echoing through the house, but something far more powerful began to happen. People started listening, not to speeches, not to rehearsed conversations, but to the spaces in between. Vanessa tried to continue as if nothing had changed. She moved through the room with renewed energy, engaging guests, laughing at the right moments, reinforcing the tone she had worked so carefully to establish. But it wasn't working the same way anymore, because now there was doubt. Subtle, quiet, but present. And doubt has a way of spreading. I watched as Diane spoke with a small group near the far side of the room. She didn't dominate the conversation. She didn't push herself forward. But when she spoke, people leaned in slightly as if they understood on some level that what she said mattered. Daniel noticed it too. I saw him standing across the room, his attention shifting between Vanessa and Diane, his expression no longer relaxed but thoughtful, almost unsettled. He wasn't fully aware yet, but he was close. Vanessa approached Diane again this time with more purpose. Would you mind stepping into the study for a moment? She asked, her voice low but firm. Diane met her gaze. If you prefer, she said. Vanessa gave a tight smile and gestured toward the hallway. They disappeared into the study together. The door didn't close completely. Not quite. And in a house like that, quiet, open, filled with attentive ears, it didn't need to. Daniel hesitated for only a second before following. He didn't announce himself. He simply moved closer, stopping just outside the doorway. I didn't move from where I stood, but I listened. Inside the study, Vanessa spoke first. Her voice was no longer warm. You had no right to come here, she said, her tone controlled but sharp beneath the surface. I was invited, Diane replied evenly. That invitation wasn't yours to accept, Vanessa snapped. A pause. Then Diane said, That's an interesting position to take, considering how many things you've accepted that weren't yours to begin with. The silence that followed was heavy. You don't get to do this, Vanessa said, her voice tightening. Not here. Not now. I'm not doing anything, Diane replied calmly. I'm simply present. You know exactly what your presence implies, Vanessa said. Yes, Diane said. I do. There was a shift then, subtle but unmistakable. Vanessa's composure cracked just enough for something real to show through. Whatever you think happened, she said, you've exaggerated it. You always did. Diane didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I documented it, she said. Another pause. Shorter this time. Selective documentation, Vanessa replied quickly. People like you always control the narrative. Diane's tone remained steady. No, Vanessa, she said. People like me preserve it. That landed. Even from where I stood, I could feel it. Daniel stepped closer to the doorway. What exactly are we talking about? He asked, his voice cutting into the tension. Vanessa turned sharply. Daniel, this isn't necessary. I think it is, he said, his tone firmer than I had heard it in a long time. Diane looked at him not with pity, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet acknowledgement. Your wife and I worked together several years ago, she said. Daniel nodded. I gathered that he said, but it sounds like there's more to it. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice quick, controlled. It was a minor professional disagreement, she said. Nothing worth revisiting. Diane didn't contradict her immediately. Instead, she asked a question. Is that what you told him? Vanessa's jaw tightened. Yes, she said. Diane held her gaze for a moment. Then she spoke. Vanessa was removed from our organization, she said, not because of a disagreement, but because of a pattern of behavior that undermined the work and the people involved. Daniel's expression shifted. What kind of behavior, he asked. Vanessa shook her head quickly. This is ridiculous, she said. She's trying to... taking credit for collaborative work. Diane continued, her voice calm but precise, positioning herself as the primary contributor in situations where that wasn't the case, leveraging relationships for personal advancement without transparency. That's your interpretation, Vanessa snapped. It's the documented outcome, Diane replied. Daniel looked between them, his confusion deepening. Vanessa, he said. Is that true? Vanessa turned to him, her expression softening instantly. Daniel, you know how these environments are, she said. Competitive, political. People get threatened when someone moves quickly. Diane didn't interrupt. She simply waited. She saw me as a threat. Vanessa continued. That's all this is. Daniel hesitated, then looked back at Diane. Do you have proof, he asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a question. And that mattered. Diane nodded slightly. Yes, she said. I do. Vanessa let out a sharp breath. You're not seriously entertaining this, she said to Daniel. In the middle of our event, Daniel didn't answer immediately. Because now... He was thinking. Why didn't you ever tell me about this? He asked quietly. Vanessa's expression flickered. Because it didn't matter, she said quickly. It was years ago. Diane spoke again. It matters when the story you've built depends on leaving it out, she said. Vanessa turned on her. You don't get to define my story, she said. No, Diane replied. But I do get to clarify my part in it. The room outside the study had grown quieter. People weren't speaking as loudly now. Some had drifted closer subtly, carefully, pretending to be engaged in other conversations while listening just enough to understand what was unfolding. Vanessa noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed. Her voice lowered again, urgent now. This isn't the place, she said. It became the place the moment you built something here that depended on not being questioned, Diane replied. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. This doesn't make sense, he said. Vanessa, you've always told me you left that organization because you wanted something bigger, something more aligned with your values. Vanessa turned to him. And I did, she said. That's still true. Is it? Diane asked gently. Vanessa's composure cracked further. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she said. She twists things. She always has. Diane didn't react, because she didn't need to. The weight of what she had already said was doing the work for her. Daniel looked at Vanessa again, and this time, he didn't look reassured. He looked uncertain, and for the first time that night, Vanessa saw it. Not just doubt, but distance. A small one, but real, and growing. I stood where I was, my hands folded loosely in front of me. I didn't step forward. I didn't speak, because this moment didn't belong to me. It belonged to the truth. And the truth was finally being heard. The study door remained slightly open, just enough for the truth to slip through into the rest of the house. No one announced that they were listening, but they were. In rooms like this, People don't need to be told when something important is happening. They feel it. They adjust. Conversations quiet down. Movements slow. Attention sharpens without anyone admitting it. Inside the study, Daniel stood between Vanessa and Diane, his posture tense in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy trying to understand something that didn't make sense. "This doesn't add up," he said more to himself than to either of them. "Vanessa, you told me you left because the environment didn't align with your values, that you wanted something more honest." Vanessa stepped closer to him, her voice softening, carefully controlled. "That's still true," she said. "Daniel, you know me. You know who I am. Do you—" I could almost hear the question forming in his mind, because for the first time he wasn't answering it automatically. Diane remained still, her presence calm but unwavering. "People don't usually leave environments like that without a reason being recorded," she said, "especially at that level." Vanessa turned sharply. "You're not going to sit here and rewrite my entire career because of one disagreement," she snapped. "It wasn't one," Diane replied. "That landed harder than anything else." Daniel's eyes moved quickly between them. "Vanessa," he said slowly. "What exactly happened?" Vanessa hesitated. "Just for a moment." But it was enough. "I've already told you," she said, her voice tightening slightly. "It was political. People didn't like how quickly I was advancing." Diane didn't interrupt. Instead, she reached into her small handbag and pulled out something simple. A folded sheet of paper. She didn't wave it. She didn't dramatize it. She simply held it. "This is a summary of the internal review conducted before Vanessa's departure," she said. Vanessa's face went pale just for a second. "You brought documents," she said, disbelief creeping into her voice. "I brought clarity," Diane replied. Daniel stared at the paper, then back at Vanessa. "Is that real?" he asked. Vanessa stepped forward quickly. "This is inappropriate," she said. "You can't just bring—" "Is it real?" Daniel repeated, his voice firmer now. That was the shift. Not loud, not aggressive, but real. Vanessa's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, she didn't answer immediately. That silence said more than anything else. Diane spoke quietly. "It is," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly, his hand moving to his forehead as if trying to steady himself. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked again, this time softer, more personal. Vanessa's voice dropped. "Because it didn't matter," she said. "It was in the past." "That's not an answer," Daniel replied. Her composure began to fracture. "It didn't matter because I moved forward," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Because I built something better. Because I didn't let one group of people define me." Diane's voice cut through calmly. "You weren't defined by them," she said. "You were held accountable by them." Vanessa turned sharply. "You don't get to decide that," she said. "No," Diane replied. But the facts already did. Daniel took a step back. His breathing had changed. Slower. Heavier. "Vanessa," he said, "did you take credit for work that wasn't yours?" The question hung in the air. Simple. Direct. Impossible to soften. Vanessa's eyes flickered. "Not in the way she's describing," she said quickly. "That's not what I asked," Daniel replied. Her jaw tightened. "I contributed," she said. "I led initiatives." Did you take credit?" he asked again. Another pause. Longer this time. "I positioned myself," she said finally. Daniel's expression shifted. "Positioned yourself," he repeated. "That's how the world works," she said, frustration breaking through now. You don't wait for recognition. You take it." Diane didn't move. She didn't react, because she didn't need to. Vanessa had just confirmed everything. Daniel stared at her. "That's not what you told me," he said quietly. Vanessa threw her hands up slightly. "Because I knew how you'd react," she said. "You're idealistic, Daniel. You think everything has to be fair and clean. It's not." His face changed then. Not just confusion anymore. Hurt. Real unmistakable hurt. "And you thought I wouldn't understand?" he asked. "I thought you'd judge me," she said. He shook his head slowly. "I'm trying not to right now," he said. "That line. It broke something." Vanessa's composure cracked fully, then the careful control she had maintained all evening slipping away. "Of course you are," she said bitterly. "Because now she's here." She gestured sharply toward Diane. "And suddenly, everything I've built is being questioned." Diane's voice remained steady. "What you built is being examined," she said. "There's a difference." Vanessa laughed a short, sharp sound. "You always did this," she said. "Acted like you were above it all. Like you were the standard everyone else had to meet." "I held people to the same standard I held myself to," Diane replied. "That's not true," Vanessa shot back. "You chose who you supported, who you elevated, and I chose based on integrity," Diane said. Vanessa turned away for a moment, running a hand through her hair. Then she said something that changed everything. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, her voice lower now, more raw. "Coming from nothing. Having to prove yourself in rooms where no one takes you seriously unless you make them." Daniel froze. "Nothing," he repeated. Vanessa turned back to him. "You know what I mean," she said. "No," he said. "I don't think I do." Her expression hardened. "I came from a family that had expectations," she said. "Pressure, limitations. I had to break out of that." Daniel shook his head slowly. "That's not how you've ever described it," he said. "You've always said you were building something new, something better, not escaping something broken." Vanessa's eyes flashed. "Because that's the version people respect," she said. The room seemed to go still. Even the quiet murmurs outside faded. Because now, she wasn't just defending herself. She was revealing herself. Daniel looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "And what about my family?" he asked quietly. "What version of us have you been presenting?" Vanessa hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Daniel's voice dropped. "Do you talk about my mom the same way he asked?" Vanessa didn't answer. Not immediately. And in that silence, the truth spoke again. From somewhere behind me, a small voice cut through the tension. "I heard you once." Everyone turned. It was Emily. Daniel and Vanessa's daughter. And Vanessa's. She stood just outside the study, her small frame stiff, her eyes wide but certain. Heard what Daniel asked gently. Emily looked at Vanessa. "You told Aunt Olivia that Grandma was embarrassing," she said, "and that she didn't understand how things work." The words echoed, soft, but devastating. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Emily, that's not—" "You said it," Emily insisted quietly. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly. Not in defeat. In realization. He looked at Vanessa again, and this time, there was no confusion left, just clarity and pain. Deep, quiet pain. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm starting to understand." Vanessa reached for him. "Daniel." But he stepped back. Not dramatically, not angrily, just enough. And sometimes that's all it takes. For a moment after Emily spoke, no one said anything. It wasn't silence in the ordinary sense. It was heavier than that. It carried realization, discomfort, the slow unraveling of something that had been held together too tightly for too long. Vanessa stood very still, not composed anymore, not controlled, just still. Her eyes moved from Emily to Daniel, then briefly to Diane, and finally almost reluctantly to me. I didn't move. I didn't look away. Because this moment wasn't about accusation. It was about exposure, and Vanessa knew it. Daniel was the first to speak. "Emily," he said gently, "why don't you go sit in the living room for a minute, okay?" Emily hesitated, her eyes still fixed on her mother. Then she nodded and stepped back, disappearing into the quiet hum of the house beyond the hallway. The adults remained, and the truth stayed with us. Daniel turned back to Vanessa. His voice when he spoke again was different. Lower, steadier. "Is that how you see her?" he asked. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, closed it, then tried again. "That's not what I meant," she said. Daniel didn't react. "Then what did you mean?" he asked. Vanessa exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across her face. "I meant that she doesn't understand how certain environments work," she said. "That's all." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "That's not all." He looked at her, really looked at her. "And I think you know that." The room seemed to shrink around them. Diane remained quiet now, her role no longer to introduce information, but to witness what came next. Vanessa straightened slightly as if gathering herself. "You're taking this out of context," she said. "Everything tonight, this entire situation, it's being twisted." Daniel let out a slow breath. "No," he said. "It's being clarified." That word, it echoed in the same way Diane's had earlier, clarified. Vanessa's composure cracked further. "You don't understand what's at stake here," she said, her voice tightening. "This event, these people, it matters." Daniel's brow furrowed. In what way, he asked. Vanessa hesitated. Then slowly she answered. "I've been working towards something," she said. "An opportunity." Diane finally spoke again. "I'm aware," she said. Vanessa shot her a sharp look. "Of course you are," she said bitterly. Daniel glanced between them. "What opportunity?" he asked. Vanessa didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation, everything shifted again. Diane stepped forward not aggressively, but with quiet intention. "Vanessa has been attempting to re-enter a philanthropic advisory circle," she said, "one that she was previously removed from." Daniel blinked. "You mean the same one you worked in?" he asked. "Yes," Diane replied. He turned back to Vanessa. "Is that true?" he asked. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's more complicated than that," she said. "Then explain it," Daniel said. Her eyes flickered again, calculating, adjusting, trying to regain ground that was already slipping away. "I've been in conversations," she said carefully, "exploring possibilities." "And this event," Daniel asked, "is it part of that?" Vanessa hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," she said. The truth was coming out now, not all at once, but steadily. "And what does that have to do with Diane being here?" Daniel asked. Vanessa didn't answer. Diane did. "I'm part of the decision-making body," she said. The words landed with quiet force. Daniel's head turned sharply toward her.
You mean you decide who gets in?
He asked. Among others, Diane replied. Daniel's gaze shifted slowly back to Vanessa. Understanding began to form not just of the situation, but of the structure behind it.
So this entire event,
he said slowly, was about impressing people like her. Vanessa's silence confirmed it.
And you didn't invite her,
Daniel continued.
No,
Vanessa said.
Why, he asked.
Another pause. Longer this time. Because now there was nowhere left to hide. Because I couldn't control how she would present things, Vanessa said finally. The honesty of it hung in the air. Raw. Unfiltered. Daniel's expression hardened.
You mean you couldn't control what she would say,
he said. Vanessa didn't respond. Because she didn't need to. He already understood. Diane's voice remained calm. I wasn't invited because I represent a part of her history that doesn't align with the image she's trying to project, she said. Daniel let out a slow breath.
And tonight was supposed to fix that,
he asked, looking at Vanessa. Vanessa's frustration surfaced again.
It was supposed to move things forward, she said, to create opportunities, at the cost of what Daniel asked.
Vanessa's eyes flashed.
At the cost of being strategic, she said. At the cost of doing what's necessary.
Daniel shook his head.
No,
he said.
That's not what this is.
His voice grew firmer.
This is about building something on a version of the truth that isn't real.
Vanessa stepped toward him.
It is real,
she said. It's just refined. Refined. The word lingered. Daniel let out a short, disbelieving breath.
Refined?
He repeated.
You mean edited?
Vanessa's jaw tightened.
I mean, improved,
she said. Diane spoke again, her tone still even.
You can't improve something by removing its foundation,
she said. Vanessa turned on her.
You don't get to lecture me about foundations, she snapped. You've always had everything handed to you.
Diane didn't react,
because she didn't need to defend herself. The conversation had already moved beyond that.
Daniel stepped in again.
This isn't about her, he said. It's about you.
Vanessa turned back to him.
And what about me?
She asked. Daniel held her gaze.
Who are you, Vanessa?
He asked quietly. The question wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It was something deeper, more honest, and more dangerous. Because Vanessa didn't have a rehearsed answer for it. For the first time that night, she looked unsure.
I'm the person who built this,
she said, gesturing around the house, the event, the carefully curated world she had created. Who created opportunities? Who elevated us? Daniel didn't move.
You elevated yourself,
he said.
The distinction mattered. And you expected the rest of us to follow your version of things, he added.
Vanessa's voice sharpened again.
I expected you to support me, she said.
I did, Daniel replied. The pain in his voice was unmistakable now. I just didn't realize what I was supporting. That was it, the line that broke through everything else. Vanessa stepped back slightly as if the words had physically struck her. The room beyond the study remained quiet, but not empty. People were still there, still listening, still watching. Because now, this wasn't just a private conversation. It was the unraveling of something that had been carefully built in public. And at the center of it, Vanessa stood alone, not because anyone had pushed her there, but because piece by piece, the truth had taken everything else away. Vanessa stood there, her shoulders squared as if she could still hold the room together by force of will alone. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in the study, not just between her and Daniel, in the entire house, because the illusion she had spent years building carefully, deliberately, was no longer seamless. It had cracks now, visible ones, and people were watching. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "What you've built," he said, slowly, looks impressive. I won't deny that. Vanessa's chin lifted slightly as if she was bracing for what came next. But I don't recognize where I fit in it anymore, he added. The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. Vanessa's expression hardened. That's not fair, she said. Everything I've done has been for us. Daniel shook his head. No, he said. That's what you've been telling yourself. Her eyes flashed. I've created opportunities for you, she said. Connections, visibility, a life you wouldn't have had otherwise. Daniel took a step back, and for the first time, there was distance, not physical, something deeper. I had a life before this, he said. Vanessa's voice sharpened. A smaller one, she replied. The word echoed. Smaller. And that was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. Daniel's expression changed. Not confusion anymore, not even hurt. Clarity, cold, steady clarity. My life wasn't small, he said quietly. It was honest. Vanessa let out a short, incredulous laugh. Honesty doesn't open doors, Daniel, she said. Not in the world we're in now. He held her gaze. Then maybe I'm in the wrong world, he replied. The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa stared at him. For a moment it seemed like she might say something softer, something that would pull him back. But she didn't. Instead, she doubled down. You don't mean that, she said. You're reacting, that's all. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, he said. I'm seeing. Her composure fractured again. You're letting her do this, she said, gesturing toward Diane. You're letting her come in here and dismantle everything. Diane remained still. She didn't respond. Because she didn't need to. Daniel's voice dropped. No, he said. You did that. Vanessa's breath caught. What she asked. You built something that couldn't stand up to the truth, he said. That's not on her. The words landed with quiet finality. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice rising now not in control anymore, but driven by something raw. You don't understand what it takes to succeed, she said. You don't understand how people judge you, how they measure you. If you don't shape your story, someone else will. Daniel didn't flinch. And if shaping it means lying, he asked. Vanessa's jaw tightened. It means surviving, she snapped. The room seemed to contract around them. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that shifted everything again. At what point, he asked quietly, did surviving become more important than being real? Vanessa didn't answer. Because there wasn't a good answer. Only the truth. And she had already said too much of it. Her frustration boiled over. People like your mother don't understand this, she said, her voice sharp, cutting. They've never had to operate at this level. I felt the words, but they didn't land the way they once would have. Because now, they weren't being whispered in hallways. They were being said out loud, and everyone could hear them. Daniel's head turned slightly. Don't, he said. Vanessa pressed forward anyway. She embarrasses you, Daniel, she said. She always has. You just didn't want to admit it. That was the moment. The one that couldn't be taken back. the one that changed everything. Daniel went still, completely still. And when he spoke again, his voice was different, not loud, not emotional, just certain. "No," he said. Vanessa blinked. "What she asked, she doesn't embarrass me," he said. "She never has." The words hung in the air, clear, unshaken. Vanessa's expression faltered. "You don't mean that she said?" Daniel didn't move. "I do," he replied. A beat passed. Then another. And then he added, "What embarrasses me is this." He gestured around them, not just the study, but everything. The event. The performance. The carefully constructed image. Vanessa's breath caught. "You're throwing all of this away," she said. "For what? For some ideal version of honesty that doesn't exist in the real world?" Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm choosing not to live inside something that isn't real." Her voice broke slightly now. "You're choosing her over me," she said. It was the question she had been building toward all along, the one she thought she already knew the answer to. Daniel didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing truth," he said. The distinction mattered, but Vanessa didn't accept it. "It's the same thing," she said sharply. "No," he replied. "It's not." Silence again. Heavy. Final. Then Daniel said the words that ended it. "I think you should leave," he said. Vanessa stared at him. Disbelief? Shock. "You're serious?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "This is my house too," she said. "Then leave for tonight," he replied. "Because this can't continue like this." Her eyes searched his face, looking for hesitation, for doubt, for anything she could use to pull him back. But there was none. Only certainty, and that frightened her more than anything else. "You'll regret this," she said. Daniel didn't respond. Because sometimes there's nothing left to argue. Vanessa looked around the room, at the people who had heard, at the life she had built, and at the way it was slipping away, piece by piece. Then she turned, not gracefully, not in control, but abruptly, and she walked out of the study, through the hallway, past the guests who pretended not to stare, and out the front door. The sound of it closing was quiet, but it echoed. Daniel stood there for a moment, still. Then he let out a long breath and ran a hand through his hair. The tension in his shoulders didn't disappear, but something else did. The confusion, the conflict. He turned slowly, and for the first time that night, he looked at me. Not past me, not around me, at me, really seeing me. And in that look, there was something I hadn't felt from him in a very long time. Not obligation, not politeness, but recognition. And something else. Something quieter. Something deeper. Respect. After the front door closed behind Vanessa, the house didn't erupt into chaos. There were no dramatic reactions, no loud whispers spreading like wildfire through the rooms. Instead, something quieter settled over everything. A stillness. Not empty, but reflective. The kind of silence that comes after something important has been said and cannot be taken back. Daniel stood in the study for a few seconds longer, as if he needed time to understand the weight of what had just happened. His hand remained at the back of his neck, fingers pressing lightly, a habit he'd had since he was a teenager, trying to think through something difficult. Then he exhaled, not sharply, but deeply. And when he did, I saw it. The shift. Not just in the situation. In him. Diane stepped back slightly, giving him space without needing to say anything. That more than anything else told me what kind of woman she was. She hadn't come to take over the moment. She had come to bring clarity, and now she allowed that clarity to settle. Daniel finally turned. His eyes moved first to Diane. "Thank you," he said. Simple, direct. Diane inclined her head. "You're welcome," she replied, though I suspect this wasn't easy. Daniel gave a small, almost humorless smile. "No," he said. "It wasn't." Then his gaze shifted. To me. And for a moment neither of us spoke. Because what do you say? When years of distance begin to close in a single night. He took a step toward me. "Mom," he said softly. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to let the moment breathe. "I'm here," I said finally. "That was enough." He nodded, swallowing slightly as if there were 100 things he wanted to say but didn't yet know how. "We should," he began, then stopped. "I should talk to the guests." It was a practical instinct, responsible, familiar. I gave a small nod. "You should," I said. He hesitated again, as if reluctant to step away. Then quietly, "Will you stay?" The question mattered more than he realized, because for a long time, I hadn't been asked that. Not genuinely, not like this. "Yes," I said. He nodded once, then turned and walked out of the study. I followed more slowly. The atmosphere in the main room had changed. People weren't pretending anymore, not entirely. Conversations resumed, but they were softer now, more grounded. The sharp edge of performance had dulled. Some guests glanced at me as I stepped back into the room, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet awareness. They had seen enough to understand something real had happened. Daniel moved through the space, speaking to people one by one. I couldn't hear everything he said, but I could see the way he carried himself, now less rehearsed, more present. More himself. Diane approached me a few moments later. "You handled that with remarkable restraint," she said. I smiled faintly. "I've had practice," I replied. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," she said. "I imagine you have." We stood together in comfortable silence for a few seconds. Then she added, "You didn't step in." "I didn't need to," I said. Diane's lips curved slightly. "No," she agreed. "You didn't." There was no pride in the exchange, no sense of victory, just acknowledgement. Because what had happened tonight wasn't about winning, it was about truth finding its way into a space that had been carefully designed to keep it out. "Thank you for coming," I said. Diane looked at me. "I didn't come for Vanessa," she said. "I know," I replied. "And I didn't come for the event," she added. I nodded. "I know that too." She paused. "Then more quietly I came because you asked honestly. That stayed with me, because honesty isn't always loud, but it carries." "I'm glad you did," I said. Diane gave a small nod. "I think she said your son needed to see this." I followed her gaze across the room to where Daniel stood speaking with a group of guests. His posture was different now, not tense, not guarded, grounded. "He did," I said. "And you?" Diane asked gently. "Did you need this?" The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, but because I hadn't asked it myself. I thought about it for a moment. Then I said I needed to stop being silent. Diane nodded.
That's often the hardest part, she said. We spoke a little longer. Nothing heavy, nothing urgent. Then after offering her goodbyes to Daniel, Diane left quietly. No attention, no spectacle. Just as she had entered, leaving behind something far more lasting than her presence. Clarity. The evening wound down slowly after that. Guests began to leave one by one, their departures polite but thoughtful. There were fewer empty smiles now, fewer rehearsed conversations. What remained felt real. By the time the last car pulled away, the house had grown quiet again. Daniel stood in the living room looking around as if seeing it for the first time. I walked toward him slowly. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I'm sorry." Not polished, not rehearsed, just real. I looked at him for what I asked gently. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair again. "For not seeing it," he said. "For not seeing you." The honesty in his voice settled into something deep. "I thought I was supporting her," he continued, "building something with her, but I didn't realize what it was costing." I nodded slowly. "It's easy to miss," I said, "when you trust someone." He looked at me. "I should have listened to you," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "You needed to come to it yourself." That mattered, because understanding forced on someone doesn't last. Understanding found does. He sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. "I don't even know where to start fixing this," he said. I sat beside him. "You start by being honest," I said. He gave a small, tired laugh. "That seems to be the theme tonight," he said. "Yes," I said softly. "It is." We sat in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. Finally, he said, "She made me believe that everything we came from wasn't enough." I turned to him. "And do you believe that I asked?" He shook his head. "No," he said. There was no hesitation this time. Good, because that was the beginning, not the end, but the beginning. "Then you already know where to start," I said. He nodded slowly. "I guess I do." The house felt different now. Not empty, not broken, just changed. And sometimes that's what healing looks like at first. Not perfect, not complete, but honest. Daniel stood after a moment. "I'm going to check on Emily," he said. I smiled. "She'll be waiting," I said. He nodded and walked down the hallway. I remained where I was sitting quietly in the living room. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like I belonged, not because someone allowed it, but because I had stopped allowing anyone to take it away. The house felt different in the days that followed. Not quieter, though it was that too, but clearer. Like something heavy had been lifted even if the space it left behind was still unfamiliar. I didn't return home immediately that night. Daniel insisted I stay not out of obligation but out of something deeper, something I hadn't felt from him in years. Need. Not dependence. Not guilt. But the kind of need that comes when someone finally understands what they've been missing. I stayed in the guest room, though it no longer felt like a guest space. The bed was the same, the furniture unchanged, but the air carried something new. Respect. It doesn't announce itself loudly, but you feel it. The next morning I woke to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. "Emily." She knocked gently on the door before opening it. "Grandma," she said. "I'm awake," I replied, sitting up. She stepped inside, her small face serious in a way children shouldn't have to be. "Are you okay?" she asked. The question surprised me, not because it was unexpected, but because of how sincerely it was asked. "I am," I said. "Are you?" She shrugged slightly, climbing onto the edge of the bed. "I didn't mean to say anything last night," she said. "I just heard it before." I reached for her hand. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said gently. She looked at me. "Mom gets mad when things aren't perfect," she said quietly. I didn't respond right away, because that wasn't something a child should have learned so clearly, but she had, and that mattered. Sometimes I said slowly, "People think everything has to look perfect for things to be good." Emily tilted her head. "Is that true?" she asked. I smiled softly. "No," I said. "Some of the best things in life aren't perfect at all." She seemed to consider that. Then she leaned against me, resting her head lightly on my shoulder. We stayed like that for a while. Quiet, simple, real. Later that morning, Daniel found me in the kitchen. He looked different. Not dramatically, but enough. Less polished, more present. "I made coffee," he said, holding up 2 mugs. I smiled. "You remembered how I like it," I said. He nodded. "I should have remembered more things," he replied. I didn't correct him, because he wasn't wrong. We sat at the table together, the morning light filtering in through the windows. It was the same kitchen where Vanessa had once stood, carefully directing everything. Now it felt open. "What happens now?" he asked after a moment. The question wasn't about logistics. It was about life. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "That depends on what you choose," I said. He looked down at his hands. "I don't think I can go back to how things were," he said. "That's not a bad thing," I replied. He nodded. "I just don't know what rebuilding looks like," he admitted. I leaned back slightly. "It looks like small things," I said. "Honest conversations, showing up, listening." He glanced at me. "And us?" he asked. I met his gaze. "We start where we are," I said. That was all. No blame. No long list of past mistakes. Just a place to begin. He nodded slowly. "I'd like that," he said. And I believed him. The days turned into weeks. Vanessa didn't return immediately. There were calls, messages, conversations I wasn't part of. That was as it should be. Some things needed to be handled between them. I didn't ask for details. I didn't insert myself. Because this time, Daniel was doing the work, and that mattered more than anything I could say. Emily began spending more time with me. We baked together simple things, nothing elaborate. She laughed more than she had in a long time, her shoulders relaxing in ways that reminded me of Daniel when he was her age. One afternoon, as we pulled a tray of cookies from the oven, she looked up at me and said, "I like it when things are like this." "So do I said. And I meant it. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. Daniel changed too. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic transformation, but in the small ways that matter most. He called more. He listened more. He didn't rush conversations or redirect them. He stayed. One evening he came by my house after work. We sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the trees that had stood there longer than any of this. "I used to think success meant becoming something new," he said. I glanced at him, and now I asked. He exhaled slowly. "Now I think it means remembering who you were before someone told you that wasn't enough," he said. I smiled. "That's a good place to start," I replied. He nodded. "It is. Time didn't erase everything. It never does. But it softened the edges. It created space. And in that space, something new began to grow. Not built on image, not shaped by expectation, but rooted in something far more stable: truth." As for me, I stopped trying to fit into rooms that required me to shrink. I stopped adjusting my voice to make others comfortable. I stopped apologizing for the life I had lived, the choices I had made, the values I carried, because I realized something important. Being called an embarrassment had hurt. Of course it had, because it came from someone inside my family, but in the end, it revealed something far more significant. The real embarrassment was never me. It was the idea that love, sacrifice, and honesty needed to be hidden to make room for something more acceptable. And once that idea was exposed, it lost its power. The evening Vanessa had tried so carefully to control didn't end the way she planned, but it ended the way it needed to. Not with perfection, but with truth. And sometimes, that's the only kind of ending that matters. There comes a time in life when you realize that being quiet doesn't always mean being kind. Sometimes it means allowing things that shouldn't be allowed. For many of us, especially those who have spent years putting family first, it's easy to believe that keeping the peace is the same as doing the right thing. We tell ourselves that staying silent protects relationships, that avoiding conflict keeps love intact. But the truth is, real love doesn't ask you to disappear. Real respect doesn't require you to become smaller. And real family doesn't treat your life, your history, or your voice as something that needs to be edited to fit a better image. Mildred Barrett didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight for attention. She didn't demand recognition. She simply chose not to hide the truth anymore. And that choice changed everything. If you've ever been made to feel like you were too much, or not enough, or an embarrassment in your own family, I want you to remember this. Your life is not something to apologize for. Your story is not something to be rewritten by someone else. And your voice, no matter how quiet, matters more than you think. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is invite the truth into the room. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something like this? What would you have done in Mildred's place? And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to be told. You're not alone, and your story matters too.